In this video, I'm gonna show you an Elden Ring build that is all about fire and explosions. The Flame Lurker reminds me of the Pyromancer builds in Dark Souls 3. In this build, most of the time, you are a spellcaster, but you will have a melee weapon as well to deal with enemies on some special occasions like fast-paced near combats. Also, I will suggest some alternatives to let you choose the best that matches your playstyle. Actually, this counts as a New Game Plus or an endgame build because for getting some of the equipment needed for this build, you need to go through at least 75% of the game. So this is a build that you can play from the beginning of Journey 2 or use it to fight a few endgame bosses in your first journey. I'm gonna showcase everything I use for this build and how you can get them. The timestamp is attached to the screen and you can pick it up anywhere you want. So sit back and enjoy yourself. Let's dive in. So first, I need to talk about the stats. This is a faith-ranged caster build that relies primarily on pyromancy, so the first thing to focus on is faith. I'm at level 200 in the New Game Plus. I have 80 faith to make it possible to cast spells with very high fire damage to turn enemies into ash. For most of the fire spells, cast times tend to be longer. Therefore, we need to level up the dexterity to make it much shorter. I have leveled dex up to 50. Don't forget that we will be casting spells left and right, so we need to have enough FP and stamina for that purpose. 40 mind and 30 endurance would be good. And for vigor and strength, I would recommend 40 and 22, but surely you can change them based on your playstyle and the melee weapon you want to use. Intelligence and arcane would be untouched. Next, let's check the equipment. The main weapon I use on this build is the Earth Tree Seal, which is undoubtedly the best seal in the game and suits any high faith character that wishes to use incantations. This seal can be found on a corpse in a cell near the Omen Killer enemy in the town below the prison town church site of Grace in Volcano Manor. It weighs 0 and scales purely with faith. Upgraded to plus 10 and with the level of 80 faith, it has 353 incant scaling. To make it even better, you can get a plus 20 damage boost if you keep the giant seal in your offhand, as I'm showcasing it here in the fight versus Godfroy. This damage boost is not based on the giant seal upgrades, and it is regardless of that stat. You can get this seal inside Giant Conquering Hero's Grave. In the large hall with the troll, drop down from either side of the platform into a room with a fire prelate. Defeat it and check the right side of the room for a corpse holding the seal. As mentioned earlier, you may not have enough time for casting fire spells when facing fast-paced enemies like dogs. And also, there are some enemies that are totally immune to fire damage. So we need to have a good melee weapon just in case to help us on some occasions. This melee weapon can be helpful in PvP fights as well. I would suggest Godskin Pillar. This weapon is a unique twin blade wielded by Godskin Apostles. It's cool, it's fast, and you can infuse it with different Ashes of War. On this build, I use Flaming Strike Ash of War. It emits flame in a wide frontward arc. You can follow it up with an R2 strong attack to perform a lunging, sweeping strike and coat the armament in fire, which is aesthetically so pleasing. You can get the weapon after defeating Godskin Apostle at Windmill Village, and the Ash of War can be obtained at Redmane Castle, dropped by a teardrop scarab in a small graveyard along the south cliffside behind the castle. The alternative for the melee weapon is the Blasphemous Blade. This is a powerful greatsword that belongs to Rykard. In my opinion, the best thing about this weapon is its skill, Taker's Flames. Also, after defeating an enemy with this sword, some HP would be restored. First, you need to kill Rykard and then trade his remembrance with Enya at the Round Table Hold to have this strong weapon. The downside of using it compared to the Godskin Pillar is that it's much slower, even though it is stronger and can incur higher physical and fire damage. Next, for the gear of this build, I use the Firemonk hood, gloves and armor. But for the greaves, I prefer fire prelate greaves, which are a bit stronger. You need to farm these items in several places. For Firemonk set, go to the camps in the western Liurnia of the Lakes, Fort Late in Maet Gilmere, and Guardian's Garrison in the mountain tops of the Giants. For the Fire Prelate set, you can farm Guardian's Garrison as well. The Fire Prelate set is heavy and oversized and makes you look so fat, which might be not so aesthetically fine. I just use the greaves of this set, but the full set or the armor is an alternative here. You can use it if you want to be tankier, but don't forget to check your equip load. You might need to level up your endurance or carry a Greyjar's Arsenal Talisman. The first talisman I use on this build is Flask's Canvas Talisman, which is an upgraded version of the Faithful's Canvas Talisman. It raises the potency of incantations by 8%. It is 2 times more effective than the Faithful's Canvas. This talisman might be a little tricky to get. If you kill Gary or Millicent before a certain progression in Millicent's quest, it would be gone for good. The earliest time you can get this talisman is when you have given her the prosthetic arm and you visit her at the Windmill Village. Then you are free to kill her. After that, kill Gary while he's crying for his beloved daughter and obtain this powerful talisman. The second talisman is the Fire Scorpion Charm. This item increases fire damage by 12%, but on the other hand, it boosts physical damage taken by 10%. The stats for PvP are 8% for raising fire damage and 15% for lowering damage negation. So keep those numbers in mind and use another talisman, for example Faithful's Canvas Talisman if you want to play it safer. This talisman boosts incantations by 4% and there is no disadvantage coming with it. The third talisman is the Godfrey icon that raises the attack power of charged spells and skills by 15%. For acquiring this item, you need to visit Golden Lineage Everjail and kill Godfrey the Grafted. The best way for getting there is by the Erdtree Gazing Hill Site of Grace. The last talisman to use on this build is the Dragon Crest Great Shield, which reduces physical damage taken by 20% in PvE and 5% in PvP. This talisman somehow recoups the increased taken damage that comes with the Fire Scorpion Charm. In order to get this legendary item, you should go to Elfell, Brace of the Halic Tree, and find it in a chest on an elevated platform inside the large building in the northeast, guarded by several pests. For the Flask of Wondrous Physic, I use Flame Shrouding Tear to boost fire attacks by 20% in PvE and 12.5% in PvP. This would be a great match with the Fire Scorpion Charm. The second tier is the Greenburst Crystal Tier to increase stamina recovery speed by 15 per second. The effects of both tiers last for 3 minutes. You can get them both after defeating the Putrid Avatar found at the Minor Tree in Caelid, east of a smoldering church. So now, by having these talismans and tiers, we have boosted fire attacks by 55% in PvE and 43.5% in PvP. I'd recommend you allocate at least 8 cerulean tiers to make sure you would have enough juice to be a proper spellcaster. Okay, now the best part. Here I want to talk about the spells. The first 2 spells are gonna give us even more buff added to that previous 55% boost. Flame grants me strength that can be found behind Fort Gale, increases damage by 20% in PvE and 15% in PvP for 30 seconds. To make the numbers better, I use Golden Vow as well to boost damage by 15% in PvE and 7.5% in PvP. It also improves the damage negation by 10%. If you pay a visit to Corpse Stained Shack in Maet Gilmere, you'll find this incantation. So the bottom line of all the buffs, including the Flask, Talismans and spells, is 90% enhanced attack power. Having a giant seal in your offhand boosts the power by 20%, so the final number would be 110%. Giant's Flame Take D is the standard bursting fireball attack that Pyromancy is famous for. It deals a ton of damage in a wide area, and the charged version can usually one-shot normal enemies. There are a few downsides to this Pyromancy. First off, it has a limited range, so you have to be relatively near to your target to actually strike it. It might be ineffective against some enemies who dodge your attacks unless they are already frozen in animation, in which case Flame Fall Upon Them or Burn or Flame would be a better choice. In spite of the mentioned limitations, you shouldn't be discouraged from using Giant's Flame Take D. It's still your most powerful pyromancy in so many cases, especially when fighting big bosses, as it is one of the highest damage ranged attacks, and its large AoE, when charged, can make quick work of large groups of enemies. I mean, don't get me wrong, the limitations just mean you can use it exclusively and you need to utilize more spells. Fall Upon Them hurls 12 fireballs instead of 1. Each fireball deals damage separately, and hitting with multiple fireballs will significantly increase overall damage. This becomes exponentially more effective when faced with larger enemies, where you might be able to hit most or all of the projectiles on a single target. However, there is a limit to this. It maxes out at 3 to 4 fireballs worth of damage, which means it can only ever deal slightly less damage than Giant's Flame Take D, even against massive enemies like dragons that would otherwise get hit by all of them. The biggest advantage of Flame Fall Upon Them is that it works against enemies that can dodge your main fireball, because the radius of the cone of fireballs is wider than enemies' dodge distance, so they will get hit by the edge fireballs even if they dodge, which means this spell could be even a better option compared to the Giant's Flame Take D when facing an NPC invader or in PvP. For acquiring these two incantations, you need to get the Giant's Prayer Book first, which is inside the chest at the very top of the Guardian's garrison on the mountain tops of the Giants. Give it to Brother Corin or Muriel to unlock them for purchase. The next is Burn or Flame, the incantation that creates fire pillars around your character, which could be the most powerful pyromancy in the game if you get near the foes and have the time to cast it. Damage can be extremely high against large enemies when multiple pillars hit, though even a single pillar deals a significant amount of damage. The immense power of Burn or Flame is constrained by how dangerous it is to use. The cast time is quite long and the pillars of fire erupt in melee range around you, so you must stand still very close to the enemy to successfully cast this pyromancy. So this is one of the reasons that I suggested having at least 50 dexterity for this build earlier in this video. Also, in some circumstances, it might be a better idea to use this spell uncharged, which has a fairly quicker startup. For having this powerful pyromancy, first you need to kill the fire giant and then go to the round table hold and trade remembrance of the fire giant with Enya. After Burn or Flame, we get to another legendary incantation, Flame of the Fell God. It's more like that you birth a miniature sun from your hand that slowly floats toward your target. Once the miniature sun gets close enough to an enemy or just reaches its max range, it will flash and then explode soon after, dealing a considerable amount of damage, knocking affected targets down and setting the ground on fire. It can knock back enemies upon exploding, which is useful against some bosses like Melania. It's worth mentioning that like all other pyromancies, this spell is extremely effective against Earth 3 avatars. They are weak to fire damage and have low mobility, often standing in the lingering flames for the whole duration. Yet there are some downsides to it. The blast radius and max range are shorter than you might expect, while the travel time is super slow, so if the enemy is moving around a lot, it might evade the explosion. You can greatly improve the reliability by staying nearby the flame of the fell god, so the enemies would have to be in the blast radius in order to hit you. Flame of the fell god cannot be charged, but deals comparable damage to a fully charged giant's flame take D. You can't have more than one fully formed mini sun out at a time either. If you cast Flame of the fell god, again before the first one has flashed to indicate an impending explosion, the first one will just spawn. Flame of the fell god has a fairly long cast time, so be careful about using it after you have already engaged in combat. It takes about as long for the Flame of the fell god to reach its target as it takes for you to fully charge another pyromancy and throw it. So against stronger enemies, it's ideal to precast Flame of the fell god immediately followed by throwing a fully charged giant's flame take D, so that both attacks detonate at the same time. You can obtain this spell by defeating Elden, Thief of Fire, in Liurnia of the Lakes. And the last spell is Flame Cleanse Me, which is an optional one because it's not an attacking spell and you won't need to be using it always. It creates a flame that damages the player but also alleviates the build-up of and cures poison, frostbite and scarlet rot. So it might come in handy in some parts of your playthrough and makes you needless of having different consumables. You can find this on a corpse at the Fireman camp southeast of the Church of Vows. Now we are done with everything you need for the Flame Lurker build. That's it guys, I hope you have enjoyed the video. If so, please don't forget to like, comment and hit the subscribe button. It helps a lot. Thank you. I'll see you in the next one.